Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio channel. Tonight we step into Mississippi in 1850, where the earth is dark and soft underfoot, where dawn mist hangs low above the fields, and where the richest cotton land in America hides one of its cruelest human truths. You can almost hear the creak of wagon wheels before sunrise, the rustle of dry stalks, the far cry of birds over the river, and the hush of people already awake long before the day admits it. What did survival look like here, in a place built to drain labour from human bodies and profit from every breath? What did endurance sound like in the quarters at night, or feel like in hands raw from cotton bolls? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you're here, comment your location and local time, so the whole sleepless little caravan can see where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, and you find yourself standing in Mississippi when cotton is king, and human lives are measured against its harvest. The first thing you notice is the land itself. Mississippi in 1850 does not introduce itself gently. It presses close. The air is damp, warm, and heavy enough to feel like cloth against your face. The soil is almost black in places, rich and fine, the sort of earth planters praise in letters as if they had made it themselves. Cotton thrives here, and that one simple fact has rearranged everything. Forests have been cut back, swamps have been edged away, roads are rough, but they lead with grim purpose toward fields, gin houses, barns, and the broad river routes that carry bales outward and money inward. You stand near one of those roads and hear the slow groan of wagon axles. Mules snort in the dim light, leather harnesses creak. Somewhere a rooster announces the morning with more confidence than accuracy. The great river system nearby is the real highway, though, and even when you cannot see it, you sense its presence. Flatboats, steamboats, muddy banks, landing posts, men shouting cargo counts, and the smell of wet wood all help bind Mississippi to New Orleans, to eastern markets, to British mills, to a vast cotton economy that depends on stolen labour. This is not a small, local arrangement. It is global. A shirt in Liverpool, a banker in New York, a merchant in New Orleans, a planter in Mississippi, and an enslaved field hand in the Delta are all tied together by cotton thread. That is one of the central facts of the age. Cotton is not merely a crop. It is a system. It shapes laws, landscapes, and dinner conversations. It decides where fortunes rise and where bodies break. And yet the landscape is strangely beautiful. That is part of its cruelty. At sunrise, the light turns the low fog silver. Dew gathers on leaves and rough fence rails. Mockingbirds chatter from branches. Pine and damp earth mix with the smoke of morning fires. If you did not know better, you might think you had wandered into a peaceful rural world. But peace here is selective. Comfort has an address, and it is not the quarters. The plantation house usually sits apart, raised a little higher if the land allows, with a breeze, a porch, and some effort at elegance. White columns appear on some estates, though not all. A planter does not need grand taste to enjoy power. Sometimes a house is merely solid, roomy, and dry, which already makes it a palace compared with the cabins nearby. Shade trees are planted close. There may be roses, or a fenced yard, or a lane swept neat. The whole arrangement whispers the same message. Order for some, exhaustion for others. Then your eyes travel farther. Beyond the main house stand the work buildings that keep the cotton machine alive. Smokehouse, stable, corn crib, gin house, press, tool shed, kitchen, dairy, perhaps a weaving room, perhaps a blacksmith area, depending on the size of the place. On large plantations, these buildings form a small forced village of labour. Every corner has a task. Every task has a body assigned to it. Set back from the main house, often in rows or clusters, are the cabins where enslaved people live. They are usually made of logs or rough boards, with stick and mud chimneys if fortune smiles, or worse arrangements if it does not. The floors may be packed dirt or crude plank. Gaps in the walls let in winter wind and summer insects alike. The smell inside is smoke, worn cloth, damp wood, and whatever food can be stretched from a kettle. You touch a wall, and the wood feels splintered and thin. You step inside, and the room seems to hold too many lives at once. A bed might be nothing more than poles, rope, and a sack of corn shucks, a stool, a pot, a gourd, a blanket if one exists, a few precious objects tucked away, a scrap of cloth saved for mending, a little carving, a hidden keepsake. Tiny acts of possession matter here because almost everything else can be taken. Many of the people living in these cabins were not born in Mississippi. That matters deeply. By 1850, the state has absorbed countless enslaved men, women, and children, forced westward from older slave states such as Virginia and the Carolinas. Traders marched people south in chained groups. Dealers sold them in markets. Families were split by debt, inheritance, gambling losses, or the endless planter hunger for labor in newer cotton lands. Mississippi grew rich not only by planting cotton, but by importing sorrow. You can feel that dislocation beneath the surface of daily life. Someone speaks with a Tidewater accent. Someone else remembers red clay hills far to the east. A woman still cooks a dish her mother taught her in Maryland. A man hums a tune his grandfather knew in Georgia. A child has never seen any place beyond this county, yet grows up among stories from half a continent. The quarters are full of memory, even when memory hurts. Historians still argue over the exact balance between continuity and rupture in these forced migrations. Some emphasize how much kinship, language, and culture survived the move. Others stress how profoundly sale and displacement shattered old networks. Both truths can live side by side. People lost worlds and still made new ones. Morning is coming faster now. The sky lightens from charcoal to pearl. A horn may sound, or a bell, or a driver may call out. Every plantation has its own habits, but the effect is the same. Sleep is over. The day belongs to cotton, and to those who claim ownership over other human beings. You can almost feel the quickened pace inside the cabins. Feet touch cold floorboards. Ashes are stirred. Babies shift and murmur. Someone coughs in the smoky air. Someone ties a head wrap with sleepy, practiced fingers. Someone else swallows the last of yesterday's corn mush. There is very little softness in the transition from night to work. Even so, people find ways to create it. A mother smooths a child's hair with her palm. A man shares a joke so dry it almost disappears into the dawn. Someone begins a low tune while stepping outside. The sound is not loud. It does not need to be. It is enough to remind everyone nearby that the plantation wants labourers, but human beings keep appearing in their place. That quiet insistence is part of survival. You follow the path between cabins and notice the ground is worn hard by countless feet. Chickens scratch nearby. A dog noses through dust. Smoke rises in blue threads into the pale air. The smell of cornmeal and wood ash lingers. In some yards there may be little swept spaces kept neat with handmade brooms. That detail might seem small, almost invisible beside the scale of plantation violence. But it is not trivial. To sweep a yard, to arrange a doorway, to wash a shirt, to save a cup from breaking, to plait hair carefully, to name a child with love, all these acts say something stubborn and clear. You are still a person here. Planters, of course, often told themselves very different stories. They described plantations as orderly households. They praised their own management. Some bragged about productivity. Others wrapped themselves in the language of paternal care, which is a very elegant phrase for holding power over people you could whip, sell, or starve. The records they left behind can be chillingly calm. One line about crop yield, another about a sick child, another about buying more shoes, then perhaps a note about a human being sold away. The tone barely changes. Bureaucracy can be deeply sinister when it keeps perfect manners. A quirky detail from plantation life, almost absurd in its contrast, is that some owners became obsessed with cotton varieties, the way modern hobbyists fuss over tomatoes or roses. They compared seeds, argued over fibre length, and swapped cultivation tips with great enthusiasm, while treating the labour system beneath those experiments as a natural fact. One can almost hear them admiring the softness of the crop, while ignoring the pain stitched into every pound. Human beings are astonishing at separating comfort from conscience. By full morning, the social map of the plantation becomes clearer. Not everyone does the same work. Field hands form the labour corps on cotton plantations, especially during planting, hoeing, and picking seasons. But there are also drivers, often enslaved men placed in the bitter position of enforcing labour under threat themselves. There are cooks, nurses, laundresses, carpenters, blacksmiths, teamsters, spinners, seamstresses, and house servants. On some plantations, skilled workers gain a little more movement or a few different privileges. It never changes the underlying fact of bondage. A larger room inside a cage is still inside the cage. Children move through this world too. That may be one of the hardest things to take in. Very young children stay near the quarters or under the watch of older people. Slightly older ones carry water, mind infants, gather chips for fuel, or begin small tasks that train them into the labour order. Play exists because children create it wherever they can. A rolling hoop, a stick horse, a rag doll, a game whispered in dust. But childhood here is never allowed to forget who rules the place. You begin to understand that survival on a cotton plantation starts before the field, before the overseer, before the basket and sack. It begins in the ability to wake inside a system designed to crush autonomy and still maintain inner life. It begins with recognizing voices in the dark. It begins with sharing heat from a fire. It begins with naming loss without letting loss become the only story. It begins with reading moods, weather, footsteps, and danger. It begins with skill, emotional skill, social skill, physical skill, the intelligence of endurance. The plantation counts output. The people within it count on one another. That is the truer mathematics. As the sun lifts higher, warmth spreads over the yards and roofs. The mist burns away. Insects begin their steady hum. Cotton fields wait beyond, pale green in growing months, white and endless in picking season. The day ahead is already demanding bodies, minutes, obedience, and speed. Yet here, in this threshold hour, you catch the deeper reality beneath the plantation's polished claims of order. Mississippi's cotton empire depends not only on land and markets, but on the daily resilience of black Americans forced to survive inside it. And survive they do, with watchfulness, memory, adaptation, humour, grief, tenderness, and 1,000 forms of strength that no ledger can measure. The road, the river, the cabins, the smoke, the damp dawn, the rough wood under your hand, all of it becomes the setting for one central fact. Life here is brutally constrained, but never empty. The people moving through this morning are not background to cotton. They are the living centre of the story, carrying pain, skill, faith, and human complexity into another Mississippi day. You wake before the sky is committed to morning. The cabin is dark except for a weak red glow breathing under the ashes. Smoke from last night's fire still clings to the rafters, and the air carries that familiar mix of charred wood, damp boards, old cloth, and sleeping bodies. Someone shifts on a pallet nearby. A baby sighs in a half-dream. Outside, a mule stamps the ground, followed by the faint jingle of harness chain. Even before your eyes are fully open, the plantation has begun to move around you. The first feeling is touch. Rough blanket against your shoulder, cold at your feet, a stiffness in your back from the hard surface beneath you. The ache in muscles never really leaves, but changes shape from day to day, settling in the neck, the hands, the legs, and then quietly returning to all of them at once. Morning is not a fresh start here, it is a continuation. Sleep only dulls yesterday's labour, it does not erase it. You sit up slowly. The room is small enough that every movement belongs to everyone. In one corner, a woman kneels near the hearth, coaxing a thin flame from coals with dry chips and patience. Her fingers are moved with the quick certainty of repetition. She does not waste motion. A man pulls on coarse trousers, then pauses to rub his wrists. A child curls deeper into a blanket for one more stolen moment. Another is already awake, looking toward the door as if light might arrive faster if watched closely. Then comes the sound many dread, a horn in the distance, low and blunt. On some plantations it is a bell. On others a shouted call, "Here." It rolls through the morning air with an almost lazy confidence, as if the day were a machine that knows exactly when to start. The sound slips through the cracks in the wall and settles over the quarters. It is not dramatic. That makes it worse. Anything repeated daily becomes frightening in a very efficient way. You rise and reach for clothing laid out the night before. Enslaved people on Mississippi plantations usually receive simple garments meant for labor, not comfort. Coarse shirts, basic dresses, heavy shoes if the plantation provides them, though many go without at times or wear footwear until it falls apart. Cloth can chafe the skin, seams scratch, a wet hem can stay wet for hours. A hat might shield part of the sun. A head wrap protects hair and offers some control over appearance in a world trying to strip that away. That small control matters. A woman ties her head wrap neatly despite the darkness. Another straightens a child's collar with care that the plantation has not earned. A man knots a worn cord around his waist to hold cloth in place. None of this is vanity, it is steadiness. Presentation becomes a quiet way of refusing complete disorder. You cannot choose the system, but you can still decide how your hands fold fabric in the morning. Near the hearth, the first food of the day is prepared. Usually it's something plain and filling, if there is enough to fill at all. Cornmeal mush, leftover ash cake, a scrap of bacon grease saved for flavour, sometimes sweet potatoes, sometimes nothing warm, only a quick bite swallowed while heading out. The smell is modest, but comforting in its own way. Wood smoke, hot meal, black iron pot. Hunger sharpens every scent. Even thin food smells generous when the day ahead is long. A child whines softly, not wanting to rise. No one can afford to linger with the feeling. On many plantations, every minute before work is work of another kind. Feed the fire, dress the children, tie up a cloth bundle, eat fast, carry water, check the kettle, quiet the baby, search for the missing shoe, rub feeling back into cold fingers. A woman who labours in the field may already have completed an hour of care before stepping outside. That domestic labour is often invisible in plantation records, but it is essential to survival. The system relies on it while pretending only field output counts. Outside, the quarters are waking as one unsettled body. Doors open. Smoke drifts upward. Chickens scatter away from moving feet. The early air feels cool for a few minutes, almost kind, before the heat arrives. The eastern sky has turned pale grey with a wash of pink near the horizon. Voices stay low, some are still thick with sleep, others are clipped and practical. A few people exchange morning greetings that are more breath than speech. You notice how quickly everyone reads one another. Who looks ill? Who slept badly? Which child has a cough? Whether the driver is tense already, whether rain seems likely, whether the overseer has been drinking, whether the horn sounded earlier than usual. This is daily intelligence, gathered in seconds. On a plantation, information can protect you. A changed mood in the wrong man can alter the whole day. Historians continue to debate how much autonomy enslaved communities could carve out in these ordinary morning routines. Some scholars emphasize the severe limits imposed by constant surveillance and the threat of punishment. Others point to the meaningful spaces people made within those limits through household practice, cooperative care, and cultural continuity. The disagreement is less about whether hardship was real than about how survival should be described. Was it narrow endurance or a constrained but persistent form of communal life standing here? You suspect it was both. A woman hands a child to an older girl for the day. The transfer lasts only a second, but the tenderness is unmistakable. Another mother presses a final bite of food into small fingers before turning toward the field road. Parents and children are constantly being sorted by labour needs, by age, by risk. Care is improvised under pressure. Older women often carry enormous burdens in the quarters, tending infants, easing fevers, watching toddlers, and keeping some fragile order while others labour elsewhere. Their work saves lives, though no ledger praises it. You walk across the packed earth and feel yesterday's grit still underfoot. Dew darkens the hems of dresses and trousers. Somewhere a cow lows impatiently. The smell of manure rises from the stable area, mixing with smoke and wet grass. One cabin door opens to the sound of humming. It is soft, almost private, yet it travels. Morning song can serve several purposes at once. It soothes a child. It keeps rhythm while hands are busy. It reminds the singer of somebody gone. It marks time. And sometimes it says what speech cannot. Music on plantations was never merely decoration. It carried memory, coded feeling, religious hope, irony, and emotional release. A tune in the dawn could sound calm to an outsider and entirely different to someone who knew the community well. That layered meaning mattered in a place where direct speech could be dangerous. The plantation wanted obedience. People answered, when possible, in forms not easily controlled. There is also humour, dry humour especially. A man glances at the thin breakfast and mutters that even the chickens would file a complaint. A woman suppresses a laugh. Another remarks that the horn always sounds strongest on mornings when the food is weakest. Nobody performs this for the benefit of the powerful. It is for one another. Jokes do not cancel oppression. They puncture it for a moment. That is not the same thing, but it is not nothing. A curious tidbit from plantation life is that some enslaved people became expert judges of time without relying on clocks, which they rarely owned. They used the stars, the feel of dawn air, the habits of birds, the angle of first light through cabin cracks, and the distant routines of the plantation itself. In such conditions, precision was practical. To wake too late invited punishment. To wake too early simply lengthened the working day. So people developed a body knowledge of time that could rival any parlour clock, though no one wrote etiquette books about that skill. The line between private and public life is especially thin in these hours. A cabin shelters intimacy, yet can be entered. A family meal is family only until a horn or order interrupts it. A mother's voice softens a child's fear, but she cannot promise safety with certainty. That uncertainty shapes the nervous system. It teaches constant readiness. It also teaches restraint, because panic wastes energy that must be saved. As the light strengthens, the plantation's hierarchy becomes visible in motion. House servants may head toward the main house earlier, preparing fires, breakfast trays, coffee, or wash water for the planter household. Skilled workers might take tools instead of hoes. Teamsters check wagons and animals. Field hands gather with sacks, baskets, or nothing yet, depending on season and task. During hoeing time, tools matter. During picking season, fingers matter more, though both will suffer by noon. You notice the drivers moving among the people. Their role is bitter and complicated. Some are feared, some quietly shield others when they can. All operate under pressure from above. A driver may urge speed because he must answer for the gang's output. He may also slip warnings, shape pace, or distribute burdens with a little more humanity than the overseer would. Plantation life creates these morally bruised positions where survival and coercion can sit in the same body. Easy judgments often fail here. Near one doorway, a woman braids another's hair quickly before they leave. The touch is gentle, practiced, intimate. Hair care takes time, and time is precious. Yet people make room for it when possible. Grooming is about more than appearance. It is comfort, social connection, and continuity. Across the wider slave South, hair carried cultural meaning, personal identity, and community style even under severe material limits. A braid finished before sunrise can feel like a hand on the shoulder saying, "You are seen." The sky is brighter now. The first flies begin to appear. Heat gathers slowly but with bad intentions. As people assemble, you sense another layer of the morning that plantation owners rarely recognized or pretended not to see. The workforce they ordered into fields was not a mass. It was a human network of parents, grandparents, cousins, spouses, sweethearts, fosterers, midwives, storytellers, healers, mourners, and comedians. The plantation reduced people to categories because categories are easier to control. Real life kept breaking those boxes open. You hear a name called twice, then more sharply. Somebody is missing. For one uneasy second, everyone feels it. Then the person appears, hurrying from behind a cabin, having gone to relieve himself or fetch something forgotten. A few shoulders loosen. These tiny alarms show how tightly the day is wound. Delay can bring scrutiny. Scrutiny can bring violence. Every morning carries stakes that outsiders might miss. An overseer rides into view or walks up, depending on the plantation. His presence changes the air immediately. Conversations shrink. Movements tighten. You can almost hear people pulling part of themselves inward. Power does not need to shout when its consequences are well known. A glance can be enough. A note in a ledger, a command, a complaint to the owner, a threat for later. The whole system depends on these habitual pressures as much as on the lash itself. Still, the morning is not only fear, it is coordination. A woman nods toward an older man who will keep watch on a child. Someone quietly agrees to share a noon drink if water is scarce. Two girls exchange a look over who will help the smaller boy keep up. A man with sore hands shifts his grip before the day starts. And another notices, this constant adjustment, this low current of mutual awareness, is part of how Black Americans survived plantation life. Not by heroic speeches at sunrise, but by dozens of practical kindnesses so ordinary they could be overlooked by anyone not living them. The line forms more clearly now, heading toward a labor. Feet move down the worn path out of the quarters. The ground is cool for a little while longer. You smell crushed grass, mud, wood smoke fading behind you, and the first sharp hint of sun warming the day. Above, the sky is cleared to a washed blue. A hawk circles far off. A child back in the cabins begins to cry, then is lifted and calmed. The sound follows briefly, then falls away. What remains is the rhythm of walking, step after step, before breakfast has settled, before the real heat, before the overseer's impatience fully blooms, before noon and its weight. This is how the day begins on a Mississippi cotton plantation in 1850, not with trumpets, not with drama, but with repeated human effort under coercion. You rise in smoke and darkness. Gather yourself from the hard edges of sleep. Take nourishment where you can find it. Read the danger in the air. Offer care where possible. And walk toward labor because the system leaves little choice. That walk, simple as it seems, contains a world. It holds exhaustion, discipline, tenderness, dread, intelligence, memory, and the quiet determination to remain human through another day that has barely begun. By the time the sun has cleared the horizon, you are already in the field. The rows stretch so far that they seem to bend into the heat itself. Neat lines of labour laid over the land with brutal confidence. Cotton plants stand at regular intervals, modest in height but endless in number, each one demanding attention from the same tired hands. The earth between the rows is dark, crumbly, and still cool near the surface, though that mercy will not last. A faint dampness rises from the ground. Soon it will become dust. This is where the plantation reveals its real face. Not in the big house, not in the yard. Here, the field has its own sounds. Hose biting soil, dry leaves brushing against cloth, the soft pull and snap of weeds loosened at the root, breath, coughing, the call of crows from fence posts, the dull thud of a dropped sack. Somewhere farther down the line, a driver calls for the road to stay straight. If the wind shifts, you catch the smell of crushed green stems, sun-warming dirt, and sweat beginning to rise through coarse fabric. There is no elegant way to describe field labour because the work itself strips away elegance. Every season changes the tasks, but none of them are easy. In spring, land must be prepared, furrowed, planted, and watched. Seeds go into the ground under strict timing, because the planter wants every acre working at once. As the plants rise, hoeing begins. Hoeing is relentless. You bend, chop, clear weeds, and move. Bend, chop, clear, and move. The motion repeats until your lower back burns with a deep, steady complaint. A slow worker is noticed. A tired worker is still expected to continue. A sick worker may be forced on unless visibly failing. Cotton does not wait, and neither do the people who profit from it. When the plants grow fuller, the field becomes denser and hotter. Leaves brush your hands and arms. Insects appear in greater numbers. Mosquitoes complain around your ears in the low ground. Gnats hover at the corners of your eyes. The sun climbs without pity. Shade is rare and usually distant. Hours lose their shape in the repetition of movement. Morning lengthens, noon drags. Afternoon can feel like an entire second day. Then comes picking season, the time outsiders most often imagine, though even they rarely imagine it correctly. When the cotton opens, the fields turn white in patches and rows, as if bits of cloud have snagged on every plant. At a distance, the sight can appear almost lovely. Up close, the bolls are sharp. They cut fingertips. They scrape knuckles. They catch on skin and cloth. You reach, pull, twist, drop into the sack, and repeat. Reach, pull, twist, drop. The sack grows heavier as the day goes on, dragging behind or hanging from the shoulder, depending on local practice. A full sack resists every step. Your fingers sting. The cotton seems light, but enough of anything becomes weight. Planters love to speak of daily picking totals. Their ledgers turn pain into numbers. A good picker might gather astonishing amounts by the end of the day, especially under pressure, but those figures were never simple evidence of skill alone. They reflected coercion, field conditions, weather, age, health, fear, and the brutal mathematics of survival. An overseer could compare weights at the gin house or the scales and use those comparisons to shame or punish. Competition could be forced between workers, because division often serves control. Yet even in that system, people found ways to help one another with glances, pacing, and shared tactics too subtle for the ledger. You feel the first scrape on your fingertip before the sun is high. It is not dramatic. Just a quick sting, then another. Cotton bolls are dry, pointed, and patient. By midday, your hands may carry several small cuts lined with dust. Sweat runs into them. The salt bites. A shirt sticks to your shoulders. The back of your neck grows hot. Your legs become aware of themselves in separate parts. Thigh, calf, ankle, foot, each one sending reports of fatigue. Still the rows continue. A strange thing about plantation labour is how much it depends on rhythm. The work is harsh, but rhythm can make it survivable. People learn how to move economically. A skilled hoe hand uses the body carefully, not because the labour is gentle, but because waste invites collapse. A skilled picker finds efficient patterns with the fingers and keeps the sack positioned to save seconds and strain. These are learned forms of expertise. Slaveholders often pretended that enslaved labour was brute force alone, but cotton fields depended on cultivated human knowledge. Fields punish carelessness. Experience matters. Historians still disagree on how much of the working pace should be attributed to gang labour discipline, and how much to worker adaptation within that pressure. Some argue the structure of supervision determined nearly everything. Others suggest enslaved workers retained meaningful control over micro-rhythms within the task, shaping effort minute by minute. In truth, both forces seem present here in the field. Command comes from above, but endurance is managed from within the body, within the row, within the small unspoken coordination among workers moving side by side. The sun rises further, conversation thins. Heat takes over. There are times when the field becomes almost silent except for labour itself. That silence is not peace. It is concentration, fatigue, caution, and heat pressing down together. Yet there are also moments when sound returns in ways that help the day along. A few words pass from one row to another. Someone murmurs a complaint funny enough to earn a restrained laugh. A line of song begins, soft at first, then steadier. Songs in the field can carry rhythm, but they also carry mood. They lift, they conceal, they witness, they remind. The overseer may tolerate a song if it keeps work moving. He may dislike it if it sounds too lively. Much depends on the man, the plantation, the weather, and his temper. Arbitrary power is one of the hardest things to live under, because no rule stays stable for long. One day a remark is ignored. The next day the same remark invites anger. People survive by reading those fluctuations better than the powerful read themselves. The tools of the field are simple and unforgiving. Hoe, sack, basket, hands, feet, body. During chopping and thinning, the hoe handle rubs the palms until blisters swell. During picking, the sack strap cuts into the shoulder, dust coats ankles and hems, mud clings after rain and tries to keep your shoes. If you have shoes, weather controls the field almost as much as supervision does. Heavy rain turns rows slick and difficult. Strong sun drains strength. Early chill numbs fingers. Humidity wraps the lungs in wet wool. Mississippi gives a full education in discomfort. And yet the eye notices things. A dragonfly flickering blue above a ditch. A hawk dropping suddenly through empty air. The clean smell of rain before clouds arrive. The tiny purple bloom of a weed nobody planted. Beauty does not stop because injustice exists. That would be simpler, perhaps. But the world goes on offering moments of grace in places that do not deserve them. A listener might think such details are too gentle for this setting. They are not. People working these fields saw the same sky anyone else saw. They felt the same breeze when it came. That sensory life mattered, even when hemmed in by violence. Perhaps especially then. At midday there is usually a break, though its length varies and comfort is limited. People may sit near the edge of the field, on the ground, on a stump, or wherever a little relief can be found. Food is plain, cornbread, cold bacon, perhaps a bit of molasses if fortune is generous. Water is precious and sometimes warm in the container. The body wants more than the plantation intends to provide. You can hear chewing, swallowing, a few tired remarks, maybe a groan as someone straightens their back too quickly. Noon is never long enough. One curious detail from cotton country is that some planters and visitors praise the visual order of well-kept rows with almost artistic admiration. They spoke of symmetry, straight lines, and the pleasing appearance of a productive field. It is a deeply unsettling kind of aesthetic appreciation, because the beauty they admired depended on exhausted bodies moving through heat from dawn onward. Neat rows are easy to enjoy when someone else is bleeding into them. After the break, the hardest part of the day often begins. The body has already spent much of its easy strength. The sun now bears down with confidence. Clothing is damp and gritty. The air seems to stop moving. Even the insect sounds slower. This is when discipline from the plantation and discipline from within the self must somehow meet. You tell your hands to keep working. You tell your feet to stay in line. You narrow life to the next few plants, then the next few after that. A worker beside you falls slightly behind. Another shifts subtly, drawing a little attention away. A joke appears at exactly the right moment, light enough to pass, sharp enough to help. Someone shares a swallow of water. Someone warns in a low voice that the overseer is watching the far side. Mutual care in the field has to be discreet. Open solidarity can attract punishment, so care often arrives sideways, in tone, timing, or the small adjustment of a body's position. Plantation records almost never capture this. They measure cotton, not compassion. Children and adolescents in the fields face their own hard education. By their early teens, many are doing substantial labour, and some begin younger in lighter tasks that soon stop being light. They learn the pace expected, the gestures of caution, the ways adults save energy, the expressionless face that reveals less to hostile eyes. To grow up in the cotton field is to receive training in endurance far too early. At the same time, youth can carry a certain quickness, a flicker of mischief, an appetite for play squeezed into odd corners of the day. Human spirits are inconvenient that way. They persist. There is also the constant presence of counting. Rows counted, weights counted, minutes counted, bodies counted. The plantation counts everything except cost in human feeling. A child misses a mother in the next row. That is not counted. A woman with fever keeps moving because she fears punishment. That is not counted. A man's hands shake with fatigue by late afternoon. Not counted. The accounting system is efficient because it excludes what matters most. Scholars still puzzle over the exact productivity gains forced out of cotton labour in the decades before the Civil War. Some link rising output to the expansion of plantation organisation and increasingly punishing picking quotas. Others debate how much seed varieties and land quality contributed, but no serious reading of the subject can avoid the central fact that improved output was extracted from enslaved people's bodies through violence, surveillance, and relentless pressure. In plain terms, the fields yielded more because people were driven harder. As afternoon leans toward evening, the quality of light changes. The white cotton glows warmer, Shadows lengthen into the rows. The field does not become easier, but the eye senses the day's turning. That can lift the spirit a little. It can also sharpen dread if the tally is still short. For some, the late hours are a race against punishment. For others, they are simply another stretch of effort in a body already near its limit. You hear the sacks dragged over dirt. You hear the low murmur of workers measuring the day by instinct. You hear someone exhale, slow and careful, as if conserving even breath. At last the order comes to stop, and all the movement shifts toward weighing, bundling and leaving the rows. Stopping can feel almost unreal. Your hands continue their motion in memory. Shoulders stay tightened long after the sack is gone. The spine takes time to believe it may straighten. Dust clings to shins. Bits of leaf and cotton lint catch on sleeves and hair. The smell of the field stays on you. Green, dry, earthy, and salted with sweat. This is how the cotton plantation works at its centre, not as an abstract institution, but as repeated human strain under watch. The field turns daylight into profit and fatigue into expectation. Yet the people within it do more than endure mechanically. They think, they adapt, they notice, they protect one another when possible. They create rhythm out of repetition and community out of nearness. Under the Mississippi sun in 1850, survival in the cotton rows means more than staying alive. It means learning how to carry a body through labour without surrendering the inward self that the field tries, every single day, to wear away. When the workday loosens its grip and the field finally releases you, the walk back to the quarters feels different from the walk out. In the morning, feet move with apprehension and sleepy haste. In the evening, every step seems to carry the full weight of the day. Dust clings to ankles, fingers stay half-curled from habit, shoulders ache where sacks have rubbed and pulled. The air still holds heat, though the sun has begun to soften. Somewhere ahead, smoke rises in thin blue ribbons from the cabins, and that sight alone can feel like a promise. Home is too generous a word for the quarters. Still, people make one there. The cabins come into view as the light turns honey-coloured. Their walls are rough and weathered, patched where they can be patched, leaning slightly here and there as though tired themselves. Chimneys smoke unevenly. Doorways stand open. The yards between cabins are hard-packed from years of use, crossed with footprints, chicken tracks, dropped husks, and broom marks where someone has swept a clean space into being. You smell ash, boiling greens, damp wood, old smoke trapped in clothing, and the faint sweet note of something baking on a hearthstone. Evening in the quarters is not leisure in any comfortable sense. It is the second shift. Field labour may stop, but life does not. Water must be fetched, fires revived, meals prepared, babies washed, old people checked on, clothes mended, shoes inspected, tools set aside, food for the next day considered, stretched, or worried over. The plantation extracts labour in the field and then quietly leans on the unpaid labour of survival in the cabins, especially on women, whose work runs across nearly every hour of the day. You duck inside a cabin and let your eyes adjust to the dimness. The room glows orange from the hearth. Smoke hangs near the rafters before finding its way out. The walls feel close. A kettle simmers. The smell is warm and sharp at once. Greens or peas, perhaps. Maybe a bit of pork if any is available. Maybe just cornmeal and onion if not. A child sits on the floor with a rag doll made from scraps too worn for clothing but too precious to waste. An older man stretches his hands toward the fire, not for warmth exactly, but for comfort in the joints. Everything in this room has been used past comfort. That is the rule! Blankets are patched, shirts are turned, mended, and worn again. A stool wobbles but remains in service. A gourd serves as cup, dipper, and bowl depending on need. A chest, if one exists, may hold the most valued possessions in the cabin. Folded cloth, a Bible if someone has one, a comb, a keepsake, perhaps a letter that cannot safely be read aloud. People become experts in extension. They make objects last because replacement is uncertain and ownership fragile. Clothing care is one of the quiet arts of survival. Plantation issue garments are often cheap, coarse, and insufficient for the weather. Women patch knees, elbows, hems, and seams by firelight after already working all day. Men stitch soles back onto shoes when they can. Children grow faster than cloth can keep up. A shirt passed from one body to another may carry the shape of both. Needles are small miracles. Thread is never casual. A patched dress or repaired pair of trousers is not just an item preserved. It is labour turned into dignity. You can hear several cabins at once if you stand near the centre of the row. A baby crying next door. Someone laughing unexpectedly hard at a joke. The scrape of a chair leg. A hymn tune floating out in pieces. Pots knocked against hearthstones. A cough that sounds too deep. A voice calling a child in from the yard. This layered sound creates the atmosphere of the quarters. Not silence, but a woven evening life held together after labour. The plantation may imagine only sleeping huts. In truth, these cabins are busy nodes of thought, care, conflict, memory, and making do. Outside, the little open spaces between cabins matter more than a stranger might guess. Yards can become places to cook, wash, braid hair, talk, shell peas, mend, soothe a child, or simply sit in air less smoky than indoors. Swept yards appear on many plantations because people maintained them with care. Cleanliness was not merely practical, though it helped with pests and mud. It also expressed order under pressure, a small but visible refusal to sink into the chaos the system expected from those it mistreated. A neatly swept patch of earth is a sentence written without words. It says someone still governed something here. Historians continue to discuss how much privacy was possible in cabin life. The physical structures were cramped, the surveillance real, and overcrowding common. Yet many scholars note that enslaved people still fashioned meaningful family and social spaces within these limits. Privacy might not mean solitude behind a locked door. It might mean a lowered voice by the hearth, a walk between cabins after dusk, a hidden item beneath bedding, or a glance understood by one person and no one else. Even in confinement, human beings carve corners of inward life. The cabin itself changes with the seasons in ways the body never forgets. In summer, heat presses inside and seems to settle into the walls. Air barely moves. Smoke can become unbearable. Mosquitoes drift in through cracks and wait for bare skin. In winter, the same cracks admit wind, and the fire never quite reaches every corner. Rain on the roof may sound soothing for a few minutes before dampness starts creeping into bedding and joints. Mississippi offers little moderation. People learn to endure wet, hot, cold, smoke, insects, and crowding as part of ordinary domestic life. One small, strange detail from plantation records and travellers' observations is the attention sometimes paid to cabin gardens, as though visitors were surprised to find beauty and care there. Flowers might appear near a doorway. Herbs could grow in a little plot. Gourds might hang nearby. To the visitor, this looked quaint. To the people living there, it was practical, emotional, and cultural. Plants fed bodies, flavoured food, treated illness, and softened the hard edge of daily surroundings. Sometimes a bloom by the door was just a bloom. Sometimes it was also defiance. Evening food preparation fills much of the quarters with motion. Cornbread or hoe cakes near the fire. Greens washed in a basin. Peas shelled into a pot. A bit of smoked meat cut fine to stretch flavour through a meal that will not be large. The sounds are intimate and repetitive. Knife against board, spoon against iron, crackle of wood, murmur of conversation. After a day in the field, the smell of anything hot feels almost medicinal. Hunger sharpens everyone's patience and shortens it too. Meals vary by plantation, season, and circumstance. But supper often becomes the day's emotional centre because it is the time when people can gather, however briefly, around something sustaining. The food may be plain, it may not be enough, yet the act of eating together matters. A mother watches to be sure each child gets a portion. Someone saves the best bite for an elder. Another quietly offers part of a share to a neighbour who looks especially worn out. These exchanges are not formal. They happen quickly, without speech sometimes. Such habits form the moral economy of the quarters, which is often more humane than anything outside it. Not everything is gentle, of course. The quarters hold strain as well. People are tired. Hunger sharpens tempers. Crowded rooms leave little room for patience. Couples argue, children cry. Illness makes every sound harder to bear. Grief can hang over one cabin for weeks. A person sold away, a child sickening, a punishment witnessed, a rumour spreading. Any of these can unsettle the whole row. Survival does not turn people into saints. It makes them human under duress, which is more complicated. You notice how much care work falls to women even after the field has taken its share. Washing, cooking, mending, child tending, nursing the sick, and preserving social bonds often continue by firelight long after men and boys have sunk into stillness. That does not mean men do nothing in the quarters. Many fetch wood, repair tools, patch structures, cradle children, tell stories, soothe babies, or cook when needed. But the burden of domestic continuity often lands hardest on women, whose strength is used by the plantation at dawn and by the household after dusk. Their labour keeps life from fraying completely. Children animate the space in ways adults cannot. A little boy traces shapes in the dirt with a stick. 2 girls whisper over a cloth doll whose face has been stitched from memory more than likeness. Someone invents a game with pebbles. Laughter flashes up, bright and quick, before being hushed. Childhood here is narrow but not absent. Imagination still appears. So does discipline, because children must learn the rules of danger early. Stay away from certain roads. Do not speak loosely near white people. Move when called. Keep your eyes open. It is a hard education delivered in small daily lessons. As darkness deepens, cabin interiors grow more intimate. Firelight works on faces gently, smoothing the day's hard lines for a little while. The sounds outside become clearer. Crickets starting up, frogs in wetter ground, distant animal noises, the occasional call from one cabin to another. Smoke smells softer now, mixed with cooked food and the faint sweetness of pine kindling. Someone begins combing a child's hair slowly, patiently, working through knots with fingers and murmured comfort. Another person rubs sore legs with grease or tallow. Touch becomes medicine when no trained doctor is meant for you. Medical care in the quarters is often improvised, practical, and communal. People rely on herbal knowledge, poultices, teas, roots, bark, steam, and experience passed through generations. Some women and men become known for knowing what to boil for fever, what leaf helps a sting, what mixture settles a cough, what root eases childbirth pain. Not every remedy works. Some are guesswork, some are skill. Plantation owners might summon a physician when it served their investment. But daily health often rested in the hands of the enslaved community itself. Knowledge lived in memory and conversation. A scholarly uncertainty lingers around the full extent of African continuities in healing practices on Mississippi plantations by 1850. Researchers can trace certain herbal traditions and spiritual understandings. Yet direct lines are often hard to prove because written records were filtered through hostile or careless observers. What seems clear is that black communities carried practical medical knowledge across generations and adapted it to new environments with remarkable intelligence. Storytelling also belongs to the cabin at night. Not grand speeches, usually. Short memories, family names spoken to keep them alive, animal tales that amuse children while teaching caution and wit, fragments of places left behind, hints of parents or grandparents remembered through food, songs or sayings. To tell a story in the quarters is not simply entertainment, it is a way of refusing erasure. The plantation wants each day to swallow the one before it. Story pulls something back out, and then there is stillness when it comes. A child finally asleep with one hand open across a blanket, an old woman resting against the wall after the pot is cleaned, a man leaning in the doorway for 1 minute of cooler air, the stars above the cabins. The day has not been kind, but the night offers moments in which people gather themselves again. You understand, standing in that smoky glow, that the quarters are not just a place where labourers return. They are where black life on the plantation is repaired, however incompletely. Each evening, the cabins are cramped, underbuilt, and imposed by power, yet inside them people cook, tend, comfort, tease, sew, heal, mourn, and love. They create forms of order not recognized by the plantation because those forms do not increase profit directly. They increase something more dangerous to the system: human continuity. By the time the fire burns lower and the room begins to settle, the quarters have done their quiet work. Not enough to make tomorrow easy, not enough to erase pain, but enough to keep bodies clothed, children fed, songs remembered, and one more night inhabited with intention. In that hard little space between exhaustion and sleep, survival takes domestic shape. It smells like ash and greens. It sounds like a spoon against iron and a voice softening for a child. It feels like a patched blanket pulled close and a hand resting for a moment on another hand in the dark. Hunger is always nearby on a Mississippi plantation. Even on days when there is food in the pot, it does not have to roar to make itself known. Sometimes it sits quietly in the body, a dull hollowness under the ribs, a weakness in the legs by late afternoon, a distracted feeling while your hands keep working. Sometimes it arrives more sharply, with a headache, a sour stomach, or the terrible knowledge that what remains in the cabin will not stretch as far as the week. To survive hunger here, you learn to count, improvise, save, gather, and cook with imagination that the plantation never intended to encourage. Rations are supposed to keep you working. They are not meant to comfort you. On many plantations, enslaved people receive weekly or monthly allowances of cornmeal, pork, bacon, molasses, or some combination of those basics. The amount varies, the quality varies, and the regularity varies too, especially when an owner is careless, stingy, in debt, or determined to squeeze as much labour as possible from as little provision as possible. A ration might look adequate on paper and still leave bodies underfed in practice. Cornmeal fills the stomach. It does not solve everything. Salt pork flavours the pot. It does not restore what heavy labour takes. So you become resourceful, very resourceful. A woman opens a small cloth bag and measures cornmeal with practiced precision, eyes doing the arithmetic before her hands do. She knows how much to use tonight, how much must remain for breakfast, and how to thicken a pot so children think the serving larger than it is. A man trims the hard edge off a piece of smoked meat and drops the rest into greens so the fat will carry through every spoonful. An older woman saves drippings, bones, and peelings because one more meal can always be coaxed from what looks finished to the careless eye. The smell of evening food often begins with smoke, then corn, then something savoury if the cabin is lucky. Cornbread on a hearthstone, peas simmering in a black pot, greens cut and cooked down with onion or pork, sometimes sweet potatoes roast in the coals, their skins blackening while the insides soften into sweetness. The scent can make a tired body feel hopeful for a moment. Hunger makes simple food smell grand. Gardens become crucial, around many cabins, in whatever patch of ground can be claimed. People grow what they can: collards, mustard greens, turnips, sweet potatoes, beans, squash, peppers, onions, cabbage, perhaps, if the conditions cooperate. Herbs too, practical and fragrant. Sage, mint, pennyroyal, maybe horehound or catnip depending on local habit and knowledge. A good garden supplements rations, but it also reduces dependence on the planter's schedule and mood. That little patch of soil might be the difference between a merely hard season and a desperate one. You kneel beside one of these plots and smell damp earth, crushed leaves, and the green sharpness of onion tops. The soil is warm from the day. Small weeds crowd between the rows because weeds love neglected places, and the garden never receives enough time. Yet it is cared for. Someone has mounded the sweet potatoes neatly. Someone has tied bean vines to makeshift supports. A child has probably been sent to watch for chickens nosing too close. Garden work often happens at the edge of exhaustion, in moments stolen before sunrise or after dark. But people do it because the body demands it, and because the soul takes pride in making something grow. Planters sometimes noticed these gardens and congratulated themselves, as if permitting a little ground counted as generosity. That interpretation misses the truth by a wide margin. Gardens were not luxuries. They were part of survival strategies developed under deprivation. To praise them without mentioning the hunger that made them necessary is like admiring a bucket in a leaking boat, and forgetting the whole. Fishing also helps feed the quarters, especially in a watery landscape like Mississippi. Creeks, bayous, ponds, and river edges provide catfish, perch, bream, gar, and other catch depending on the region and season. A boy might slip away with a line made from whatever material can be spared. A man might set traps or fish at night when the day's labour is done and the mosquitoes are vicious. The smell of river mud clings to clothes and hands, thick and cool. A fish cleaned behind a cabin can transform a thin supper into a good one. Not every planter allows this freely. Not every planter can stop it. The same is true of hunting. Rabbits, squirrels, possums, raccoons, wild birds, and occasionally larger game might supplement the diet when skill, luck, and opportunity meet. Hunting is risky because it requires time, tools, movement, and often secrecy. But the knowledge involved is impressive. Tracking, snaring, moving quietly, knowing where animals feed, knowing when moonlight helps and when it betrays. A rabbit in the pot is not only protein, it is proof that ingenuity can still bend the rules of scarcity. One quirky detail from plantation life is that possum, which many outsiders mocked as poor people's food, could become a prize meal when prepared well, roasted slowly, seasoned carefully, and served with sweet potatoes. It was remembered with real affection in many black southern communities. Taste does not obey status. The fine table may sneer while the cabin quietly enjoys the better supper. Children often gather too: berries, nuts, wild greens, plums if there are trees nearby, persimmons when the season is right and the fruit finally softens enough not to punish the mouth. Blackberries can stain hands purple and shirts permanently. Pecans, where available, are treasures worth cracking. Even a handful of chickweed or poke in careful hands can become part of a meal, though plant knowledge must be exact. The land offers help, but it demands understanding in return. That understanding is serious knowledge. It is learned over years. A grandmother points to one leaf and says yes, another and says no. A father teaches a boy where fish collect when the water drops. A mother shows a girl how long to soak, boil, or season something bitter so it becomes nourishing. Survival depends not only on effort, but on expertise passed through ordinary conversation. Nobody calls it a lecture. It is simply what you must know to eat. Historians still debate the precise calorie gap between plantation rations and actual labour demands, because records are uneven and local conditions varied widely. Yet few doubt that many enslaved people routinely had to supplement owner-provided food to maintain health. The existence of gardens, fishing, gathering, and trade was not a charming side note. It was evidence that the official food system often failed to meet basic human needs. Trade helps too. Informal exchange networks appear wherever people are denied fair access to goods. Someone with extra eggs swaps for greens. A woman who is good at sewing trades a repaired shirt for a little molasses. A man with fishing luck shares catfish in return for tobacco, or help mending a trap. On some plantations, enslaved people are allowed tiny market opportunities on Sundays or holidays. On others, such activity is restricted or forbidden but continues in quiet forms. A spoonful of sorghum, a handful of peas, a little lard. These things move hand to hand and cabin to cabin, creating a local economy of need and reciprocity. Cooking is where all this ingenuity comes together. The food itself may be humble, but the methods can be artful. Cornmeal becomes ash cake, hoe cake, mush, pone, dumplings, or crust depending on need and creativity. Greens can be cooked soft and rich with whatever fat exists. Beans thicken into a stew. Sweet potatoes roast, mash, or disappear into bread. A little pepper changes the whole mood of a pot. Smoke from the hearth seasons everything slightly, whether invited or not. The iron pot does heroic work, producing meals out of odds and ends that should not be enough. You watch a woman stir a kettle with a long wooden spoon, then taste the broth and add a pinch of salt saved carefully in folded paper. Her movements are exact. She knows how to make the meal feel fuller than it is. She knows how long children will wait before their patience breaks. She knows which elder needs the softest portion and which man worked hardest in the ditch that day. Cooking here is not only feeding, it is management, memory, and care shaped into steam and flavour. And there is memory in the food. That matters more than outsiders often realize. Dishes carry ancestry even when ingredients change. Okra, field peas, rice where it can be had, greens cooked down slowly, seasoned broths, ash-baked breads. All of these can hold echoes of African, Caribbean, and Southern traditions braided together over generations. Forced migration shattered many direct lines, yet culinary habits persisted stubbornly. Techniques survive where names are lost. Taste keeps record where paper does not. Scholars still argue over how best to trace specific African continuities in antebellum foodways, because written documentation often came from observers who misunderstood what they saw. Even so, the broad influence is unmistakable. Black cooks shaped Southern food profoundly, from seasoning methods to staple combinations, while receiving little credit and far too little food themselves. That irony is almost too sharp to touch. Water, too, is part of hunger's story. Clean water is never a simple assumption. It must be carried, stored, and guarded from contamination as best as possible. Buckets are heavy. Wells may be distant. Creek water can sicken. Warm water on a hot day still brings relief, but the body craves coolness rarely available in quantity. You hear the slosh of a pail being set down outside a cabin and realize how much labor sits inside even that one sound. There are harder days when hunger turns from background to emergency, a crop failure in the garden, pork spoiled, fishing poor, illness in the cabin, a planter delaying rations. In those moments, every scrap grows important. Cornbread is broken smaller. A bone is boiled again. Wild greens are gathered twice in a week. Children ask for more, and adults must answer with tenderness they do not feel, because what they feel is fear. Hunger makes time long. It slows thought and shortens temper. It can turn the world into smells you cannot satisfy, and yet people keep feeding one another. This is one of the quiet miracles of plantation life. A neighbor sends over a spoonful of peas. A girl carries bread to an old woman with swollen ankles. A mother pretends she has already eaten so a child will not notice the smaller portion on her own plate. A man brings back one fish and gives away half. Such gestures do not end scarcity. They interrupt its loneliness. In a system built on extraction, generosity becomes a kind of resistance. Not dramatic, not announced, but morally real. Night meals often gather people close around the hearth. The fire cracks softly. Steam rises from the pot. The smell of greens, meal, onion, and smoke fills the cabin. Metal spoons touch bowls. Someone blows on a hot bite. Someone else licks molasses from a finger with a look of deep concentration, because sweetness deserves attention when it appears. Children eat fastest when very hungry, then slower once the first edge has passed. Adults may talk quietly or not much at all, depending on the day. The body eases little after food. A little, enough to make tomorrow possible. That is the standard by which many meals are judged here. Not whether the supper impresses, but whether it sustains, whether it keeps the headache away, whether it lets a worker stand in the field again, whether it quiets a child's crying, whether it comforts an old person enough to sleep. By the end of the evening, the pot is scraped, the crumbs gathered, the leftovers, if any, set aside under cloth. The smell of cooked food lingers in the smoke-dark cabin, richer now that the meal has happened. Outside, the garden waits in the dark. Somewhere beyond, a creek moves under moonlight. The land around the plantation still holds fish, roots, berries, and chances for those who know where to look. Survival on a Mississippi cotton plantation is never handed over whole. It is assembled, meal by meal, from ration, garden, trap, line, memory, and care. You begin to understand that food here is not only nourishment, it is planning, it is knowledge, it is tenderness under pressure, it is the labour of making too little become enough for one more night. In every patched garden row, in every fish cleaned by lantern glow, in every pot coaxed into flavour with almost nothing in it. Black Americans on these plantations show a brilliance the system depends on while refusing to honour. They survive by feeding life where the plantation feeds only work. Love on a Mississippi plantation does not arrive in the form of safety. It arrives in the middle of danger and learns to live there. You feel it in the way a mother reaches for a child's face before the field horn sounds, in the way two people speak softly at a doorway after dark, in the way an older man remembers names across several households and calls them out like a map. Family here is not simple, because slavery will not allow simplicity. Yet family is one of the strongest things in the quarters precisely because the system threatens it so often. The first truth is painful. Anyone can be taken. A husband sold south, though he is already in Mississippi, and there is always somewhere farther south to go. A daughter hired out. A son sent to another property after an owner's death divides the estate. A mother marched away because a debt needs paying. The possibility of separation hovers over daily life like a storm that may or may not break, which means affection develops under conditions of uncertainty few free people could bear for long. To love fully when the law protects neither your marriage nor your parenthood is an act of courage so ordinary that it can be missed. And yet people marry. They court, joke, hope, quarrel, and make plans. Formal legal recognition is denied, but custom within the enslaved community gives relationships shape and seriousness. A man may visit a woman at night from a nearby plantation if distance and permission allow. A couple may mark their union before elders, family, or a preacher, whether secretly or openly, depending on local conditions. Gifts are small because means are small, perhaps a ribbon, a carved object, a special meal, or simply the labour of showing up night after work. Tenderness does not require much furniture. One of the sounds of evening on some plantations is the footfall of visiting spouses or sweethearts, what some later called courting paths worn between places of bondage. Imagine that. Even the ground remembers longing. A man walks miles after field labour to see the woman he loves for an hour or two, before turning back. Shoes wear thin, mud sticks to hems, frogs call from ditches, mosquitoes rise from wet grass, but the walk is made because the visit matters. That kind of devotion cannot be dismissed as sentimental. It is survival through attachment. Inside the cabin, family life is made from repetition. A child washed in a basin, hair braided by firelight, names taught carefully, manners corrected, a little one hushed through thunder, bedtime prayers whispered over several heads at once, an elder telling a story while younger hands shell peas. These moments may look small against the enormity of slavery, yet they are where belonging is built. Family is not only blood or legal status. It is a pattern of care repeated until it becomes identity. Children often live inside wider circles than the nuclear family model later generations came to expect. Grandmothers, aunts, unrelated, older women, older siblings, and trusted neighbours all help raise them. A child may know exactly which cabin to run to for comfort, which woman gives the sternest warning, which man can carve a toy, which elder remembers the best stories. This broad net of care becomes essential because slavery makes every household vulnerable. Shared child rearing is not evidence of weak family ties. It is evidence of strong ones stretched wide enough to survive pressure. You hear a little boy calling 3 different women some version of mama or auntie, and no one seems confused. Kinship language in the quarters can be beautifully flexible. People claim one another in speech because the plantation is always trying to unclaim them. Fictive kin, as scholars later call it, sounds clinical compared with the warmth of the thing itself. In practice, it means this child is mine to feed if needed, yours to discipline if he strays toward danger, ours to remember if his mother is sent away, and never entirely alone while any of us remain. Historians still debate how much plantation disruption reshaped black family forms, versus how much those forms also reflected long-standing African and African-American communal traditions. The argument matters, but standing in the quarters you sense that people were less interested in theory than in keeping one another alive. However the structure took shape, it carried immense emotional intelligence. Family became something sturdy enough to include absence. Absence is always present here. A name spoken in the cabin may belong to someone in another county. A lullaby may have come from a grandmother a child never met. A woman stirring the pot may pause for a second because the smell reminds her of a sister sold years ago. Memory itself becomes family work. Parents try to give children more than food and warning. They give them stories of who they belong to. Your grandmother was clever. Your father sang loudly. Your aunt could heal a fever. Your brother had quick feet. Your people came from Virginia. Your people came from Carolina. Your mother loved red cloth. These details might seem ordinary, but under slavery they protect personhood. They tell a child that life did not begin and end in this field, on this plantation. Under this owner, you come from somewhere. You belong to somebody. Naming is powerful for the same reason. Enslaved people often had names imposed or altered by owners, yet within the community names carried deeper layers. Nicknames, family names, pet names, secret names of affection, all could coexist. A child might answer differently in the yard than under a white man's eye. To be called by a beloved name in the cabin is to be restored to yourself after a day of being handled like inventory. There are also birthdays, though not always exact by the written calendar. Ages are guessed, remembered through seasons, tied to floods, deaths, harvests, or an owner's move. Celebration may be modest, perhaps a sweetened cake if ingredients can be spared, perhaps just extra attention, a song, a blessing. A story repeated because it belongs to that person, marking a life matters. Slavery treats people as units of labour. Family insists each life has its own shape. One curious feature of plantation family life is the care some parents took in creating toys from almost nothing. Cornhusk dolls, rag dolls, carved animals, little whistles, hoops, and handmade balls appear in recollections and accounts. These objects were cheap in materials and rich in meaning. A toy says your pleasure matters, your childhood matters. Even here, especially here, mothers carry especially heavy emotional burdens. They work, nurse, soothe, instruct, and often dread the market with a fear so constant it becomes part of the weather of the mind. To mother under slavery is to love while knowing the law may dismiss your claim entirely. Yet mothers still teach posture, courtesy, songs, prayers, food habits, and family memory. They become the first historians many children ever know. Their authority inside the cabin can be profound even when the outside world denies their rights. Fathers are kemdos, too, navigate distorted ground. Slaveholders often tried to reduce black fatherhood by ignoring it, interrupting it, or making male labour so consuming that care work became harder to sustain visibly. But fathers are present in many ways, protecting, advising, joking, carrying, repairing, teaching boys and girls alike how to move through danger. A father may have only a few evening hours with a child, yet those hours can be packed with instruction. How to look respectful without surrendering too much, how to fish a creek bend, how to whistle for a dog, how to remember the dead, how to keep a promise when the world makes promises ridiculous. There is gentleness here. There is also discipline. A child who wanders toward the wrong road may be jerked back sharply and scolded hard. A teenager who speaks too boldly may receive a fierce warning at home. Such discipline can look severe from a distance, but often it comes from terror, translated into instruction. Parents know the plantation punishes swiftly and unevenly. Better a child cry in the cabin than suffer for ignorance outside it. Love under slavery sometimes sounds stern because the stakes are so high. Courtship has its own texture too. Young people still flirt. They steal moments at water buckets, exchange teasing remarks, notice who walks with confidence, who sings well, who can laugh after a hard day, who keeps their clothes neat despite everything. Attraction survives because bodies and hearts do not wait for justice before beginning their work. A young woman may ask careful questions about a man's character long before she trusts his compliments. A young man may try to impress not with possessions, which are scarce, but with steadiness, humour, or the willingness to visit faithfully. Romance under constraint becomes very good at distinguishing performance from devotion. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how widespread formalized marriage rituals were across Mississippi plantations in 1850, because documentation is uneven and often filtered through outsider eyes. Some accounts describe broom jumping or community witness ceremonies, while others suggest more informal recognitions. What seems undeniable is that enslaved couples created bonds understood as real and binding within their own moral worlds. Regardless of what the law refused to see, jealousy, heartbreak, and conflict also belong to this human landscape. People disappoint one another. Promises are broken. Visits fail to happen. Someone's eye strays. Someone leaves under pressure. Someone says cruel things in anger. Slavery intensifies these hurts because choice is already limited and fear constantly interferes with trust. Yet the existence of conflict only confirms the reality of emotional life. These are not pale imitations of family. They are family under siege. You notice the elders most clearly as night deepens. They sit near doors or hearths, less hurried now, carrying authority earned through suffering and memory. Some have seen children sold, owners die, new overseers arrive, epidemics pass through, floodwaters rise and churches split. They understand that family is more than the people asleep under one roof. It is a network of obligation held together by remembrance and repeated care. When an elder names relations across cabins, it sounds almost like weaving, and children listen, maybe not as patiently as elders would prefer. Still, they absorb it. Who belongs to whom? Which names must be respected? Which stories are family stories? Which songs are sung at bedtime and which at morning? This transfer of knowledge is crucial. Without it, sale and death could erase lines of connection in a generation. With it, identity survives in fragments that can still anchor a life. Sometimes love appears in the plainest actions. A woman saving the tenderest piece of sweet potato for her husband. A man taking over the rocking of a restless baby while the mother eats. An older sister washing a younger brother's face with more care than patience. A grandmother rubbing grease into a child's cracked hands. None of this is dramatic. That is why it matters so much. Slavery is dramatic enough. Family survives in the routine act it cannot fully stop. There are nights, of course, when fear enters the cabin and sits among everyone. Rumour of a sale, news of an owner's debt, talk of dividing property after a death. The very language is chilling. Property, division, inventory, estate. Families hear these words and understand what polite white society means by them. A legal process elsewhere can become a broken household here. Sleep comes badly on such nights. Parents watch children breathe and do terrible mathematics in their heads. If they take one, who might remain? If they take the mother, who feeds the baby? If they send the boy away, who teaches him our names? Yet even under that pressure, people keep choosing attachment. They keep investing in children, falling in love, making marriages, claiming aunties, respecting elders, and building households that the law does not honour but cannot erase from lived experience. That is one of the strongest rebukes to slavery's logic. The system says bonds are conditional. The people inside it keep proving otherwise. By the time the cabin settles and the youngest children drift off, you can feel the dense human fabric that holds the quarters together. Family here is not fragile because it is informal. It is durable because it has learned to bend without surrendering its core. It smells like warm skin, smoke, and laundered cloth drying by the hearth. It sounds like low voices, sleepy laughter, and an elder correcting a name until the child gets it right. It feels like a hand smoothing hair in the dark and a promise made softly because the walls do not need to hear it. On a Mississippi cotton plantation in 1850, black families survive not because the system leaves them room, but because they insist on making room anyway. They widen kinship when blood ties are threatened. They turn memory into inheritance. They teach children belonging in a world designed to steal it. They love under terms no one should have to accept. And by doing so, they keep something living that the plantation cannot measure, cannot price correctly, and cannot wholly break. When night settles fully over the plantation and the work buildings fade into shadow, another world begins to gather. It is quieter than the day world, but not weaker. The air cools a little, carrying the smell of pine, damp ground, ashes, and distant water. Crickets start their steady music. Frogs answer from low places. A breeze moves through the trees with a sound like careful breathing. Under this dark sky, faith becomes something you can almost feel on your skin, not polished or formal, but warm, secretive, and alive. The plantation may claim the body. It cannot fully command the soul. Black life on cotton plantations in Mississippi in 1850 is threaded through with spiritual practice. Some of it takes place openly, in forms white owners think they understand. Some of it happens in hidden gatherings, whispered prayers, coded songs, and moments of inward communion no overseer can monitor. Religion here is not simply doctrine. It is comfort, language, resistance, mourning, memory, and hope carried in the body after a long day in the fields. You notice first the sounds, a low humming from one cabin, a verse of a hymn sung so softly that it seems intended for the singer alone, a child repeating words taught by a grandmother before sleep, two women speaking over a sick neighbour in tones both tender and firm. Prayer does not always arrive dramatically. Often it enters ordinary life as naturally as smoke curling from a chimney. A blessing over food, a hand laid on a fevered forehead, a whispered plea before the horn, a thank you breathed after making it through another day. Many slaveholders encouraged a version of Christianity among the enslaved, but usually on narrow and carefully managed terms. They favoured sermons about obedience, patience, and heavenly reward. Some white ministers preached to enslaved congregations or allowed supervised attendance in plantation chapels and churches, expecting religion to reinforce order. Passages about servants obeying masters often received suspiciously enthusiastic attention. It is almost impressive how often powerful people discover that Scripture agrees with them, yet that is not the whole story. Not even close. Black men and women heard the Bible with different ears. They heard about Moses and bondage, about the Israelites in captivity, about deliverance, judgment, rivers crossed, chains broken, proud rulers brought low. They heard Christ speaking to the poor and burdened. They heard songs of sorrow turning toward joy. The same text that planters used to preach submission could also nourish spiritual imagination that reached far beyond the plantation gate. Meaning was not controlled nearly as tightly as slaveholders hoped. In the quarters, prayer often belongs to the group as much as the individual. A baby is ill. People gather. Someone begins with a few simple words. Another joins in. A hymn line follows. The rhythm of speech changes. Voices bend and answer one another. You can feel the air in the cabin thicken with shared intention. Firelight flickers on tired faces. A child leans against an elder's knee. The smell of smoke and sweat mixes with the clean, sharp scent of crushed mint steeping in hot water nearby. Healing, grief, and worship blur together. And then there are the hidden meetings. These might take place in a cabin with watchers posted, in a ravine away from the road, in brush arbor spaces, or under trees where the night itself seems to provide cover. Sometimes these gatherings are called hush meetings, because secrecy matters. The singing may be muffled with pots turned down or cloth placed to soften sound. Feet tread carefully on leaves. Lantern light, if used at all, is dim. People move with the alertness of those who know discovery could bring punishment. Yet the danger is part of why the gathering matters. A forbidden prayer has a different temperature. In such meetings, worship can become fuller, freer, more emotionally expansive. Songs rise and fall, bodies sway, some cry openly, others speak of burdens too heavy for daylight conversation. Scripture is remembered, retold, and reshaped through lived experience. God is not a distant master in these moments. God is a listener in the night, a judge of injustice, a keeper of tears, a source of strength, when strength should have run out by noon. The spiritual world opens because the social world has been made so cruelly narrow. One striking feature of black religious life under slavery is the central role of song. Spirituals are not entertainment here. They are containers. They hold grief, endurance, wit, theology, memory, warning, and hope. The melody may seem simple to an outsider, but the emotional range can be enormous. A song can soothe children, pace labour, express longing, or hint at meanings beyond the obvious words. Repetition does not flatten the feeling, it deepens it. The same line sung 10 times becomes a ladder for the heart. You hear a voice begin alone, then another joins below it, then a third answers from the doorway. The harmony is not polished in the parlour sense, but it is rich, layered, and deeply human. It rises through smoke and darkness with a tenderness that almost hurts. Sound touches the skin in a place like this. It vibrates in the ribs. It steadies breathing. It reminds the singer that loneliness is not always final. Some songs lean toward sorrow, some toward triumph. Some carry hidden shades between the two. A river in the lyric may be heaven, but it may also be escape, crossing, distance, cleansing, or the passage from one state of suffering to another. Scholars later spent much energy trying to decode every possible double meaning, and surely some songs did carry practical subtexts. Yet not every layered song was a secret map. Sometimes a river was allowed to be many things at once, which may be even more powerful. Historians still argue over the exact extent to which spirituals functioned as coded communication for resistance or escape. Some emphasize symbolic meanings and subtle signals embedded in songs. Others caution against turning every lyric into a hidden instruction. What seems beyond dispute is that these songs carried meanings deeper than what slaveholders usually heard, and that black communities used them with sophistication both emotional and cultural. Faith also lives in gesture, hands raised, eyes closed, knees bent beside a pallet. The way an old woman says a child's name inside a prayer, slowly, as if building a wall of protection around it. The way a man stares into the fire after singing and seems to be listening for something not audible to anyone else. Religion here is embodied. It is breath, posture, tears, rocking, clapping softly. Silence held in common. Silence matters. Not all prayer is spoken. Some of the most important spiritual life on the plantation may happen wordlessly. A woman carrying water at dusk may pray inwardly with each step. A man in the field may whisper only one line all morning and return to it with every row. A mother watching her child sleep may have no formal words left and still send a full petition upward through exhaustion. In a world with so little privacy, inward prayer becomes a hidden room no one can search. There are also practices that do not fit neatly into the categories white observers preferred. Protection rituals, dream interpretation, signs, charms, healing traditions, and understandings of spirit that draw from African inheritances as well as Christian belief may all circulate through plantation life. A bit of root tied in cloth, special care around thresholds, a warning not to ignore a certain dream, water used with intention, a prayer spoken over an herb. Outsiders often dismiss these things as superstition, but that word mostly reveals outsider arrogance. A quirky detail from the wider world of enslaved religion is the use of overturned pots or kettles in some hidden gatherings to help muffle sound during worship. Imagine the tenderness and caution of that scene. People are trying to speak to heaven while also making sure the overseer does not hear them doing it too freely. It would be almost darkly funny if it were not so moving. The plantation's weekly schedule can shape religious life too. Sunday may offer a little more time, though never as much as the body needs. On some plantations, enslaved people are compelled to attend white-controlled services. On others, they gather more informally among themselves when work eases. A Sunday shirt might be the least torn one. A face is washed more carefully. Hair is combed with extra patience. The meeting may happen under a tree, near a cabin, or on a neighbouring place if movement is possible. Even when the sermon is limited, the fellowship around it can nourish people deeply. Children absorb faith early. They learn hymn lines before they understand every word. They watch elders pray over sickness, weather, and danger. They ask questions about heaven with the bluntness children always bring. Is Grandma there? Does God see the field? Why did my brother die? Answers are not always tidy. Sometimes an elder pauses a long while before responding. The theology of the quarters is not polished for debate. It is forged in grief and tenderness. It must be strong enough to hold suffering without surrendering hope altogether. For the sick and dying, spiritual care becomes especially intense. A cabin where illness has settled may fill with prayer, whispered encouragement, cool cloths, herbs, and song. The smell of fever, vinegar, smoke, and steeped leaves hangs in the room. Voices stay low but steady. Someone reads or recites scripture from memory if no Bible is present. Someone else keeps watch through the night. If death comes, mourning practices gather around the body with a gravity the plantation can never really understand. Grief has its own sacred order. A scholarly uncertainty remains around the exact blend of African spiritual survivals an evangelical Protestant influence in Mississippi plantation religion by 1850. The written evidence is filtered and incomplete, and many practices were intentionally hidden from white view. But the broad picture is clear enough. Black religious life was creative, adaptive, communal, and deeply shaped by the conditions of slavery without being reducible to them. It drew from multiple streams and made something strong enough to endure. Faith is also tied to time, not clock time, soul time. The sense that this world, however dominant it appears, is not the final measure of justice. That belief can steady a person through astonishing suffering. To say that God sees what the master does not acknowledge is no small thing. To say that sorrow will not last forever is not mere comfort talk on a plantation. It is a declaration that the planter's power has limits, even if those limits are not visible tonight. This is why spiritual life can contain a kind of gentle defiance. Not loud rebellion, not always direct political language, but a refusal to accept slavery as ultimate truth. Every prayer for deliverance, every song about crossing over, every sermon retold around a cabin fire that places the enslaved among God's chosen sufferers carries that refusal. The Plantation says this is simply how the world works. Faith replies that the world as it is will answer to something higher. You feel that most strongly at the end of a gathering when the song fades and no one moves right away. The night air enters cool through the cracks. Someone wipes tears with the back of a hand. A child half asleep on a lap opens one eye, then drifts again. The last notes still seem to hang in the rafters. No miracle has visibly occurred. The field remains, the overseer remains, hunger remains. Yet everyone in the room has changed a little. Shoulders loosen, faces soften, breath deepens. Hope, which had been pressed flat by the day, rises again enough to be carried into morning. That is no small victory. On a Mississippi cotton plantation in 1850, Black Americans survived not only by working, eating, mending, and loving, but by believing. Believing that sorrow can be spoken aloud, believing that the dead are remembered, believing that children can be blessed into another day, believing that justice exists beyond what the plantation permits. Their faith smells like pine smoke and damp earth. It sounds like a hymn hummed through tired lips and a prayer whispered over a fevered child. It feels like knees on the rough floorboards and a hand clasped in the dark. In a world built to reduce human beings to labor, spiritual life keeps insisting that each soul is vast, known, and precious. That insistence travels through the cabins at night like a hidden current, quiet but powerful enough to carry people through one more Mississippi dawn. On a cotton plantation, resistance does not always announce itself with fire or flight. More often, it lives in small emotions, half seen and quickly denied if questioned. A slowed hand, a broken tool that broke a little too conveniently, a warning whispered at just the right moment, a lesson passed to a child out of sight. These acts may seem modest from a distance, but in a world built on total control, even modest refusals carry weight. The plantation wants more than labor. It wants compliance. That is a harder thing to secure. You begin to notice resistance in the very texture of the day. A hoeing gang moves forward, but not quite as fast as the overseer hoped once his back is turned. A picker with sore fingers lets a little cotton remain deep in the bowl rather than tearing skin further for the owner's benefit. A woman pauses to tie her head wrap with more care than the field schedule deserves, reclaiming 30 seconds of self-command. A driver gives the warning to close ranks before the overseer rounds the bend. A man answers a foolish question with respectful words and empty information. Every plantation is full of these micro-decisions. They matter because slavery depends on constant extraction. It wants every minute productive, every body transparent, every thought legible. That level of domination is impossible. Human beings keep producing opacity. They hide emotion, they disguise intention, they act one feeling while carrying another. Sometimes resistance is no more than that refusal to become fully readable to power. You can hear it in speech. Enslaved people often develop careful ways of talking around authority. A direct no may be dangerous, but a vague yes can sometimes serve. Words stretch, meanings bend, A sentence can sound obedient while revealing almost nothing useful. A shrug can become strategy. Silence can be wiser than wit, though wit has its place too. There is an old survival skill in knowing when to seem dull before a man who takes pride in underestimating you, and underestimate they often do. That arrogance creates openings. Planters and overseers frequently assumed they understood everything important about the people they enslaved. They prided themselves on reading character, measuring effort, and spotting trouble. In reality, they often mistook caution for stupidity, sorrow for submission, and outward calm for consent. Their confidence made them careless. Under the cover of that carelessness, enslaved people carved out choices where they could. One of the most common forms of resistance is simply the control of pace. Work can be performed adequately, poorly, sluggishly, or with just enough competence to avoid punishment. Bodies in a field are not machines. They tire. They ache. They also negotiate with the task. A worker may hold back a fraction of effort that no one can prove was withheld. Across a day, across a season, across a large labour force, those fractions add up. Planters complained constantly about laziness because complaint was easier than admitting that coerced labour naturally resists full enthusiasm. Tool damage belongs to this quiet world too. A handle left too long in the wet, a blade nicked, a strap worn through. Some breakage is ordinary, of course. Hard labour destroys equipment, but not all damage is innocent, and not all innocence can be disproved. A broken hoe can slow a row. A missing pin can delay a wagon. The plantation relies on objects, and objects are wonderfully vulnerable to accident. Then there is feigned ignorance. A worker who surely understood the order may misunderstand it at exactly the right time. A child sent on an errand may return slowly, distracted by the very complexity of the task. A message may be delivered with less urgency than requested. Instructions can get foggy in the heat. Human memory is such a fragile thing when the order is unpleasant. This kind of resistance works best because it wears the face of plausibility. The powerful are often furious, but fury is not proof. You also notice how information travels in the quarters and fields. News moves along paths the planter does not control well. Who was whipped? Which overseer is in a worse mood than usual? Whether patrols are thick on the road? Which nearby plantation has had a sale? Who might be planning to run? Who needs help? Information is survival. Passing it discreetly can be an act of protection and resistance at once. A warning given in time may spare someone a beating or help them avoid a trap. The plantation hates unsupervised communication for good reason. Communication creates community, and community limits power. Literacy, where it exists or is sought, becomes especially threatening to slaveholders. Teaching an enslaved person to read is often illegal or fiercely discouraged in the South by this period. Because reading opens doors the plantation cannot watch. A few children of the main house may let letters slip accidentally or half deliberately. A hired preacher may reveal more than it intended. An older person who learned years earlier may pass on scraps in secret. Lessons happen in dust with sticks, on walls, by tracing letters in ash, or by memorizing Bible verses and matching sounds to marks. A child bending over dirt to draw a letter looks harmless. The act is not harmless to slavery. It is combustible. One curious detail from antebellum life is how often literacy instruction survived in fragments. Someone might not read fluently, but could recognize names, numbers, or enough letters to build further knowledge. A woman might learn from torn newspaper used to wrap goods. A boy might copy marks from a barrel stencil. A man might memorize writing by candlelight from a borrowed scrap. Education under slavery often moved in glimmers rather than smooth lessons. But glimmers were enough to unsettle the whole system. Historians continue to debate how widespread covert literacy actually was on plantations like those in Mississippi, because hidden knowledge leaves uneven evidence. Some scholars stress the legal repression and practical barriers that kept reading rare. Others point to the many traces of clandestine learning in memoirs and testimony. Whatever the exact numbers, the fear slaveholders showed toward black literacy reveals how dangerous they considered it. They were not frightened of alphabet drills for no reason. Resistance can also take cultural form. To keep a song the owner does not understand. To tell stories that teach cunning. to maintain naming practices, to preserve hair care traditions, to cook according to inherited knowledge. All of this protects a self the plantation would rather flatten. Cultural persistence is not always visible as opposition, but it keeps alive frameworks of meaning outside the master's design. That alone is significant. A people with memory are harder to rule, absolutely. Then there are the acts of bodily self-defense that stop short of open confrontation. Working just carefully enough to conserve strength for the evening, saving the best food for those most depleted, avoiding pregnancy when possible through knowledge passed among women, though the evidence around methods is necessarily partial and sensitive, pretending greater illness than one feels, or lesser illness than one feels, depending on what will protect the body best under the circumstances. Survival often requires tactical choices around health, fertility, and labour that white records either ignore or misread entirely. Women in particular may resist in ways the plantation rarely dignifies as political, though they are deeply political in effect, refusing an overseer's familiarity, shielding daughters, passing herbal knowledge, concealing pregnancies until concealment is impossible, creating female networks of warning and aid, managing household resources so children stay stronger than the ration system intended. The plantation counts cotton bales. It does not count how many times a woman quietly disrupted its claims over body and kin. You hear resistance in humour too. Not broad, reckless mockery where it can be punished, but sharp observations shared among trusted people. A planter who boasts of his own wisdom becomes the butt of a joke in the quarters before nightfall. An overseer's ridiculous walk is imitated just enough to provoke quiet laughter. Humour does not topple a regime, but it punctures the aura of superiority that sustains one. To laugh at power, even softly, is to deny its sacredness. There are, of course, more direct acts as well. Theft from the plantation, though that word is morally slippery when applied to people denied the fruits of their own labour. Extra meat taken, produce pocketed, cloth appropriated, tools borrowed indefinitely, firewood gathered from the owner's land without apology. Such acts are common enough to trouble slaveholders endlessly. They call it stealing. The people doing it might more accurately call it evening the account. When your whole life has been taken, the ethics of a chicken become complicated. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how much everyday resistance materially reduced plantation profits versus serving primarily as symbolic or protective action. Some historians emphasize that these acts rarely threaten the system's overall stability. Others argue that the cumulative drag of slowdowns, theft, sabotage, and information sharing significantly shaped plantation management and exposed the limits of control. Both views contain truth. The system endured, but it endured while constantly being contested in miniature. You can feel that contest in the air at dusk. A woman returns with something extra hidden beneath her apron. A boy who spent the day apparently obedient now practices letters in dust behind a cabin. A man fixes a trap in near darkness, preparing tomorrow's supplement outside the plantation ration plan. Two workers exchange a look over who will take the blame if a tool is not found. A driver chooses not to notice a pause that should have been reported. None of these acts alone will destroy slavery. Together they create a world in which slavery never receives the full, effortless compliance it desires. Even rest can be resistance. Real rest, when stolen, protects the body from complete depletion. A minute taken in the shade too long, a task stretched, a slower walk to the spring, eyes closed for one breath before the next demand begins. The enslaved body is the plantation's primary instrument of profit. To preserve that body for oneself, even slightly, is a meaningful act. It says the body is not only a tool, it belongs inwardly somewhere else. You begin to understand why slaveholders were so obsessed with discipline. Their punishments were not only responses to dramatic rebellion, they were attempts to manage the endless seepage of minor refusals that made domination unstable. Orders had to be repeated. Threats had to be renewed. Surveillance had to be maintained because control kept fraying at the edges. Human beings kept introducing friction, and there's one more layer. Hope itself can resist. To imagine a life beyond the plantation, to believe children should know letters, to preserve names, to sing of deliverance, to save food, to choose a spouse, to pray for justice. All of this refuses the plantation's claim to total definition. Resistance is not always an event. Sometimes it is the steady refusal to let the oppressor write the only story available. By night, under the close Mississippi sky, those refusals collect. They smell like pine smoke and hidden food. They sound like whispers, low laughter, a lesson in the dirt, a song with more meaning than it first reveals. They feel like sore hands still capable of gentleness, and minds still agile after a day designed to exhaust thought. On a cotton plantation in 1850, black Americans survived not by submitting inwardly, but by practicing hundreds of small acts that protect autonomy, knowledge, dignity, and one another. The plantation sees labourers moving in rows. It misses the deeper truth. Inside those rows are people calculating, withholding, adapting, teaching, mocking, sharing, protecting, and quietly refusing to become what the system says they are. That quiet refusal is not small because it is quiet. It is one of the strongest sounds in the whole plantation world, even when only the night can hear it clearly. Fear is built into the plantation as carefully as the fences and roads. It does not arrive by accident. It is cultivated. You can feel it in the way conversations lower when certain footsteps approach, in the way a child's face changes at the sight of a mounted overseer, in the way adults measure every glance before speaking. Cotton wealth in Mississippi depends not only on land and labour, but on a system of punishment designed to keep both in line. The fields may produce the crop, but fear helps manage the harvest. This fear has many shapes. Some are loud, some are quiet. The most obvious is physical punishment. Whippings, beatings, confinement, chains, and public humiliation exist to mark the body and instruct the witnesses at the same time. The lash does not strike only one person. It strikes everyone made to hear it, anticipate it, or remember it. That is part of the method. Violence on the plantation is both pain and theatre. It warns. It performs power. It tells every person present that the owner's will can enter flesh if challenged. Even the tools of punishment carry their own atmosphere. Leather, rope, shackles, stocks on some places, a post in the yard, a tree used too often. The sight of such things changes the air before anything happens. The smell can be unforgettable too. Sweat, dirt, metal, sometimes blood, though people rarely need to see much to understand the threat. Anticipation does a lot of the work. The plantation is efficient that way. It does not need to punish every act of resistance. It needs to make punishment imaginable at all times. The overseer often stands at the centre of this daily regime. He is hired to manage labour, report output, and apply force when deemed necessary. Some are explosive men who carry anger like a second whip. Others are cooler, more bureaucratic, equally dangerous because they make cruelty look routine. A planter may prefer one style or the other depending on his own temperament and the size of his operation. Either way, the enslaved learn quickly to read posture, voice, drink, and mood. A bad overseer can make every hour feel uncertain. A merely calculating one may be worse in the long run. Drivers occupy a more painful and morally tangled position. Enslave themselves. They can be used as extensions of discipline. Pressed to maintain pace and report lagging workers. Some enforce harshly out of fear, pressure, or identification with power. Others soften what they can, shield whom they can, and try to keep punishments from escalating. Their situation is a cruel example of how slavery tries to distribute responsibility downward while hoarding authority upward. The system loves to stain everyone it can, yet punishment is not limited to the body. It reaches into time and kinship, a threat to sell a spouse, the hiring out of a child, the denial of passes, extra labour on Sunday, reduced food, removal from preferred tasks, the refusal to allow visits between loved ones on neighbouring plantations. These forms of discipline can wound without leaving marks obvious to white eyes. Emotional punishment is especially effective because it attacks the relationships that make survival possible. Slaveholders understood this very well, even when they pretended otherwise. The sale is one of the deepest terrors in plantation life. A whipping hurts now. A sale rearranges the future. Rumour of a sale can move through the quarters like fever. People speak more quietly. Parents watch children with a new intensity. Couples count what little they own and realise how little can travel if separation comes. Nothing needs to happen that night for sleep to vanish. The possibility alone is enough. In a place where the law treats family as secondary to property, market logic becomes intimate violence. You hear fear in little questions. Did you hear what the master said? Was that trader on the road this morning? Why did he ask the boy's age? These questions drift from cabin to cabin and settle in the body as tightness. The smell of supper is still there. Crickets still sing. A child still laughs at some small game. Yet underneath all of it, dread hums. Plantation life trains people to live with dual awareness, attending to ordinary tasks while scanning constantly for catastrophe. Children learn fear young, not as an abstract lesson, but as something felt in the body. They learn which adults can protect them and which cannot. They learn the sounds of anger from the big house. They learn when to stand still, when to lower their eyes, when to run toward the quarters, when not to ask questions. Some children become solemn earlier than any child should. Others stay lively and impulsive in ways that terrify their parents, who know the world will not interpret childish boldness kindly. A child's safety depends partly on innocence and partly on learning to surrender innocence early. One strange and unsettling detail from plantation life is how often punishment was rationalised in terms of management, as though it belonged in the same category as crop rotation or mule care. Owners wrote of discipline with chilling ordinariness, reducing human suffering to a matter of plantation order. The language can be almost more disturbing than the act because it reveals a mind that has made room for cruelty without emotional friction. Evil with paperwork is always a special kind of cold. Historians still debate the degree to which planters relied more on terror or on incentive and paternal posturing in maintaining control. Some emphasize constant coercion and the ever-present threat of violence. Others point out the ways owners use small privileges, personal favoritism, and claims of benevolence to secure cooperation. In practice, the two often work together. A pat on the shoulder from a master who can sell your child is not kindness. It is part of the architecture of fear. The quarters respond to this danger with collective care. That may be the most important truth here. When punishment falls on one person, others gather close if they can. A wound is cleaned, a fever watched, food carried over, a child distracted while adults speak in lowered tones. Someone sleeps near the injured, someone else keeps lookout. Compassion on a plantation often has to become practical immediately. There is no room for abstract sympathy. Hurt requires action. A woman beaten or overworked may be rubbed down with grease or tallow to ease pain in the muscles. An elder may prepare poultices from herbs known to reduce swelling. Warm cloths are applied. Water is fetched. The cabin smells of smoke, sweat, vinegar, and medicinal leaves crushed in a bowl. Prayer enters the room naturally. So does anger, though it must be managed. Open rage can bring more punishment. Quiet rage lingers, banked like a fire under ash. The community also protects one another through testimony, though often in cautious forms. Someone can confirm a person's whereabouts. Someone can say a tool truly was broken already. Someone can watch a child while a mother recovers. Someone can spread word that the overseer is hunting for a runaway and certain paths must be avoided. Protection does not always look dramatic. Often it looks like coordination. The plantation produces fear. The quarters answer with organised attention. You see this most clearly after a punishment has occurred. No public speech is made, no committee forms. Yet by nightfall, the right people know. Food arrives from one cabin, a blanket from another. The sick child of the injured person is kept elsewhere for the evening. An older woman comes to sit and says little, but stays long enough that silence becomes company. People who have almost nothing still know how to redistribute care. There is also psychological defence. Humour returns even here, though gently and never too soon. A survivor of punishment may be given a small joke once the danger passes, not to diminish suffering, but to welcome them back into the circle of the living. Children are coaxed towards sleep with stories so they do not dream only of the yard. Work songs resume the next day. because routine itself can be a form of repair. Life must continue, and making it continue with some dignity is part of how communities fight despair. Runaways reveal another layer of fear. Not everyone runs, and many who do are caught. The risks are immense. Patrols, dogs, unfamiliar terrain, hunger, punishment on return, sail farther south. Yet the very possibility of flight haunts slaveholders because it proves their authority is not complete. When someone disappears, even for a day or two, fear moves in both directions. The quarters fear retaliation. The owner fears example. People may know more than they say. Silence can protect the absent, but silence also endangers those left behind if suspicion falls widely. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how often Mississippi plantation communities were able to shield the intentions of escapees from owners or overseers. Some evidence suggests broad cooperation at times, while other cases show the terrible constraints that made secrecy hard to maintain. The record is incomplete for obvious reasons. What is clear is that the moral world of the quarters did not align neatly with the legal world of the plantation. Protection, betrayal, caution, and fear all interacted under extreme pressure. Another form of punishment comes through deprivation: shoes withheld, blankets delayed, food reduced, medical care postponed. Such measures can seem less dramatic than whipping, but they grind the body down steadily. They tell the enslaved that even comfort at the most basic level is conditional. A cold night without adequate covering, a week in failing shoes, a denied visit to a sick relative. These experiences teach dependence through suffering. The body remembers them, and still, people resist becoming only afraid. That is crucial. If fear were total, the plantation would not need to renew it so constantly. But fear never entirely conquers humour, prayer, desire, loyalty, cunning, or hope. That is why punishment must keep returning. The human spirit keeps growing back around it. The quarters remain full of people who have seen terrible things and still share food, braid hair, teach songs, plan marriages, pass on names, and imagine some future beyond the fence line. Fear is powerful. It is not all powerful. You can sense this in the way a parent comforts a child after a frightening day. The adult's voice is soft. The hand strokes the child's back in slow circles. Outside, the plantation lies under moonlight as if innocence belonged to it. Inside, safety is improvised from touch, breath, and repetition. You are here. Lie still. I have you. That promise may be incomplete in a world like this, but it is not empty. It is one of the few shields available, and people raise it again and again. By late night, after the yard has gone quiet, the fear does not vanish. It settles into the background, where so much of plantation life lives. People sleep while remaining alert to unusual sounds. A hoofbeat after dark, voices near the road, the creak of a wagon at the wrong hour. Rain on the roof may briefly mimic footsteps and send a pulse through the room before the mind sorts one sound from another. Even rest is rarely free from watchfulness. This is what life under punishment looks like from inside. Not constant screaming, though that happens. Not uninterrupted horror, though horror is real. It is a system in which threat becomes part of ordinary time, woven into work, family, sleep, and memory. Black Americans on Mississippi cotton plantations survive this by creating local worlds of warning, care, concealment, and repair. They teach children caution without surrendering tenderness. They tend the injured. They share rumour and truth. They gather around the hurt and refuse to let pain isolate them completely. The plantation uses fear to divide and weaken. The community answers by closing ranks where it can. That answer does not erase danger. It does something more modest and more profound. It keeps people human inside danger. It smells like herbs steeping in a smoky cabin. It sounds like a whisper through the dark and a hymn hummed low so a frightened child can sleep. It feels like a blanket spread over wounded shoulders and a hand remaining in place until breathing slows. In that care, the system meets its limit. It can punish bodies, threaten families, and darken every hour with uncertainty. But it cannot stop people from turning toward one another in the aftermath. And sometimes that turning is the bravest act of all. By the time the plantation settles into its deepest night, you understand that survival here is not a single skill. It is a whole way of being. It is waking before dawn and still finding the patience to soothe a child. It is bending over cotton rows while guarding a private self inside. It is making supper from almost nothing, praying in a whisper, laughing carefully, patching cloth by firelight, reading danger in a man's footsteps, and still preserving tenderness for those who need it. On a Mississippi cotton plantation in 1850, survival is not passive endurance. It is active, intelligent, and deeply communal. The plantation measures life in output. The people within it measure life differently. They measure it in names remembered, children fed, songs kept alive, gardens coaxed from poor odds, and mornings met without surrendering the inward sense of personhood. This difference in measurement matters. It is the moral divide at the centre of plantation life. One side asks, how much cotton? The other asks, who is still here? And how do we keep them whole enough to face tomorrow? You can see that divide in the objects of daily life. The planter's ledger, neat and cold, with columns of pounds and dollars. The iron pot in the cabin, blackened from years of meals made under pressure. The sack dragged through the field. The broom worn short from sweeping a little yard into order. The prayer book, if one exists, or the memory that replaces it when none is allowed. A needle, a fish line, a carved toy, a patchwork blanket. These things tell different truths about what matters. The plantation worships profit. The quarters preserve life. Endurance here has a rhythm shaped by repetition. Dawn rises, labour begins, hunger sharpens, heat bears down, evening gathers, children are gathered too, songs return, sleep comes in pieces, then dawn again. It would be easy to imagine such repetition as flattening human experience until every day looks the same. Yet the remarkable thing is that people keep making meaning inside repetition. A garden grows leaf by leaf. A child learns a story word by word. A marriage deepens through small acts. Faith strengthens by nightly use. Hope, though often bruised, remains dynamic. It adjusts. It narrows and widens. It looks for openings. Hope on a plantation is not naive optimism. It is disciplined. It does not deny suffering. It studies it, works around it, carries it, and still leaves room for possibility. That possibility may be modest tonight. A baby's fever breaks. A husband returns safely from a visit. The sweet potatoes yield well. An overseer is transferred. A letter is learned. A punishment is avoided. The mind of a child remains bright despite the field waiting ahead. Hope can also stretch farther, toward freedom not yet visible, toward justice not yet near, toward a future held in imagination before it can be held in law. The future is always strange on a plantation because it is both denied and constantly thought about. Slaveholders want the enslaved fixed in an eternal present of labour. But nobody lives that way inwardly. Parents think ahead for children. Young people dream about spouses, cabins, travel, escape, or a world that treats their names more honestly. Elders look beyond their own years and try to place memory into younger hands before death takes them. The future survives in teaching. Teach the child how to fish. Teach her that leaf from this one. Teach him the family names. Teach them the song. Teach them what kind of man to avoid. Teach them what God hears. That teaching is one of the greatest acts of resistance. It tells time to keep moving. On some nights, perhaps. You step outside the cabin and look over the plantation under starlight. The fields are dark now, nearly invisible except for their faint geometry under the moon. The big house stands farther off, quieter than by day. Trees edge the road in black shapes. The air smells of earth cooling after heat, smoke thinning from the last fires, and water hidden somewhere beyond sight. It is possible to feel, for one suspended moment, that the land itself is listening, not judging exactly, witnessing. Witness matters because so much of plantation life depends on denial. Slaveholders denied cruelty while practicing it. They denied black family bonds while profiting from their rupture. They denied black intelligence while depending on black skill. They denied black spirituality while trying to control its form. They denied black humanity while building an entire economy on black human labour. Survival under such conditions requires a stubborn answer to denial. You're here. You feel this. You know this. You remember. You pass it on. One curious detail from the culture of memory is how ordinary places can become sacred through repeated human meaning. A tree where evening prayer gathered, a creek bend where fish were caught and secrets exchanged, a doorstep where mothers braided hair, a patch of yard always swept carefully by one elder. To an outsider, such places might seem insignificant. To those living there, they hold layers of feeling. The plantation map marks property. The people create another map, one of memory, grief, affection, caution, and endurance. Historians still argue over how best to describe the emotional world of enslaved communities without either romanticizing resilience or reducing people entirely to suffering. It is a difficult balance because both errors are tempting. To emphasize survival alone risks making bondage seem bearable. To emphasize terror alone risks erasing the creativity, wit, faith, and love that also existed. The truest picture lies in holding both. Life on Mississippi cotton plantations was cruel beyond defense, and the people forced to live there developed remarkable forms of strength that deserve careful respect. Strength, though, should not be mistaken for invulnerability. People broke, people grieved, people despaired. Some nights no joke could lighten the room. Some losses tore through a cabin and left it altered for years. Some wounds never fully healed. Some children grew up with absences that shaped them permanently. Some hopes went unanswered. To say that black Americans survived plantation life is not to say they did so untouched. Survival often meant carrying scars, visible and invisible, while still choosing life for oneself and others. That choice was not abstract. It happened in tired bodies and smoky rooms. You notice how often care works against the grain of exhaustion. A woman who should already be asleep still checks a child for fever. A man whose back is burning from the day's labour still repairs a loose board before rain comes. An elder who has buried too many people still comforts another mourner. This is not the plantation's achievement. It is the community's refusal to let suffering have the last word every night. Care becomes almost infrastructural here, as essential as firewood or water, because without it the whole fragile arrangement of life would collapse. There are also dreams, literal dreams. Sleep on a plantation is not always peaceful, but the dreaming mind goes where it can. People dream of rivers, parents, songs, old places, open roads, kitchens full of food, babies not yet born, and voices of the dead. Dreams can comfort or trouble. They can be interpreted seriously, dismissed, or discussed by mourning with great interest depending on the community and the dream itself. In any case, they reveal that the inner world remains busy even after the field has claimed the daylight hours, and memory works beside dreaming. Memory is one of freedom's earliest houses. You remember a mother sold away and keep her sayings alive. You remember a father who taught you how to mend a net. You remember a hymn line from childhood and teach it to someone younger. You remember a place across state lines you may never see again, but by describing its smell after rain you let it exist once more. Memory does not end slavery. It disrupts slavery's attempt to define reality entirely within its own boundaries. It carries evidence that life is larger than the plantation claims. That evidence lives in the body too, in the practiced motions of cooking, in the dance hidden inside a work song's rhythm, in the healing touch on sore muscles, in the braiding of hair, in the ability to read weather and soil, to catch fish, to mend clothing, to soothe children, to pray with authority, to sing harmony, to plant, chop, carry, and still speak with gentleness at the end of the day. The body is where exploitation happens, but it is also where knowledge survives. The same hands forced into labour can still create beauty, tenderness, and skill beyond the owner's use. A Mississippi cotton plantation in 1850 is meant to appear permanent. The fields seem endless. The routines seem fixed. The owner's authority seems natural only because he repeats it every day with enough violence to make contradiction costly. But beneath that appearance, nothing is entirely still. Children grow, elders die. Songs move from one voice to another. Rumours cross roads. Literacy flickers. Faith deepens. Resistance shifts form. The future presses at the edges of the present even where the present looks immovable. That pressure may not yet have a single shape you can point to in the night. It may be no more than a deep intuition, carried in prayer and story, that the world as it is cannot remain the only world forever. People who survive by teaching children, by protecting marriages, by memorizing names, by reading signs, by tending gardens, by gathering secretly to sing of deliverance, are already living against the plantation's claim to final authority. Their survival contains an argument. It says that black life is larger than bondage, wiser than the rules built to contain it, and oriented toward a horizon the plantation cannot own. You stand for a moment in the yard and hear the last murmurs settle. Somewhere a baby turns in sleep. Somewhere an elder coughs once and then goes still again. The night insects continue their patient chorus. The stars above Mississippi are indifferent to the planter's bookkeeping. They shine over the quarters and the main house alike, flattening rank for anyone who chooses to look up long enough. Perhaps that is part of the comfort. The sky does not sign bills of sale. Inside the cabins, blankets are pulled close. The smell of smoke remains in the cloth. A few embers glow red, then dim. Tomorrow will come with its same demands, but tonight has held enough food, enough prayer, enough laughter, enough mending, enough watchfulness, enough love to make tomorrow possible. Sometimes that is what victory looks like in a place like this. Not triumph with trumpets, survival with dignity and tact. And now the night softens further. The cabin grows quieter, breath steadies. You let the darkness become gentler around the edges. The hard outlines of the day blur and recede. The rows of cotton are gone from view now, hidden under moonlight and distance. The yard is only a pale shape. The pine trees beyond the cabins sway with a hush, so light it sounds like a secret being kept well. Somewhere far off, water moves slowly through the land, steady and unhurried, as if time itself has decided to lower its voice. You can rest here for a moment, just here. The fire has dropped to a low glow, warm enough to comfort, dim enough to calm the eyes. The smell of ashes, clean earth, and night air drifts together into something almost soothing. Inside the cabin, people sleep in the closeness they know best, protected not by walls strong enough to trust, but by the nearness of one another. A hand lies open on a blanket. A child leans against a mother's shoulder even in sleep. An elder breathes slowly in the corner, the rhythm soft and even. The songs are quiet now, but not gone. The prayers have settled into the room. The names are still held. Let your mind move gently across this night without haste, across the swept yard, across the dark garden rows, across the worn doorstep, the iron pot, the patched cloth, the hidden hopes, the whispered blessings, the love that kept finding ways to live. The plantation wanted exhaustion. The people made meaning. The plantation wanted silence. The people made song. The plantation wanted obedience. The people made community. So the night holds them. And it holds you too, softly now. The fields can wait beyond the dark. The road can disappear into shadow. The stars can hang above the cabins without asking anything at all. You breathe in the last trace of wood smoke and let it pass. You listen to the crickets, the far water, the quiet human breathing gathered under rough roofs. Everything grows slower, everything grows dimmer. The story eases into stillness, and the stillness into rest.